A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining this first event on cooling, jointly hosted by the Green Climate Fund and UN Environment U4V. Um, we would like to, first of all, thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to be part of this cooling initiative. We feel that cooling, as I think all of you, that is a very important sector within the whole energy efficiency space, as well as from a climate perspective as well. As you know from the AC for All, as well as from KSEP literature, uh, if we do the cooling right, we will be able to, reduce 1 degree of global cooling by 2021. So we have a huge challenge in front of us, as well as a great opportunity. So therefore, I would just like to say once again, welcome to this. And this is the first webinar that we're doing, and we hope that this is going to be a continual effort in terms of really making this into a series of webinars as we go forward, and then also to kind of take this webinar one step further to even see if we can come up with specialized either web trainings or trainings into the cooling and the different aspects that you will hear today. And I would just like to say we have a very good list of panelists here with us who will be talking about different aspects of cooling from the introductions to different methodologies to different types of tools that we're also working on, as well as we have from the secretary, the GCF Secretariat, Eduardo, who will be talking about how GCF readiness can actually be a way to really engage with GCF in terms of really starting to make the cooling work as we go forward. So without ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Herman Vasquez, the Director of Division of Mitigation and Adaptation for the GCF, as well as my boss, to provide his opening remarks and to kick us all off in this cooling adventure. Over to you, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Sabin. It is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this event on scaling up GCF projects on energy efficient and climate-friendly cooling. Energy efficiency is a key driver of climate change mitigation and adaptation, as we all know. It is an essential tool for mitigating climate change by reducing energy-related CO2 emissions and offsetting energy demand growth. Energy efficiency factors heavily into government climate change policies and strategies that aim to reduce emissions in line with the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are pledged under the Paris Agreement. Yet, while nearly 2/3 of NDCs contain energy efficiency targets, these are often limited to high-level commitments and lack detail on implementation. Therefore, dedicated policies in support of these targets are needed to be adopted or strengthened in order to rapidly scale up deployment of energy efficiency and take advantage of opportunities to reduce energy demand and emissions. Globally, cooling represents 10% of electricity consumption, and demand for cooling is increasing rapidly, driven mainly by growing population, urbanization, and rising income levels in developing countries. When we talk about cooling, the first thing that comes to people's mind is luxury hotels and high-end air conditioning. However, cooling is not just luxury, it also goes beyond high-end use. For example, the WHO estimates that the lack of cold storage in public health system contributes to an estimated 1.5 million vaccine-preventable deaths each year. Also, the lack of food supply cold chain results in a loss of water of nearly 1/3 in the total food produced annually, with associated financial losses of almost $1 trillion per year. In Asia alone, heat stress leads to about more than $600 billion in productivity loss, according to SE for All. And also, more than 1 billion people don't have access to proper cooling, and 2.3 billion people use inefficient cooling systems. Aside from phasing out HFCs in accordance with the Kigali Amendment, this phase-down schedule could avoid up to 0.5 degree centigrade of warming by the end of this century. Global cooling demand is skyrocketing. By 2050, global energy use for cooling is projected to triple, putting pressure on energy systems and hampering efforts to address climate change. Doubling the energy efficiency of air conditioning by 2050 would reduce the need of more than 1,300 gigawatts of generation capacity, which is equivalent to all the coal-fired power generation capacity in China and India combined in 2018. The conventional build it and they will come approach will no longer work, and the time to act is now. The Green Climate Fund, the GCF, as a catalytic fund, is following a two-pronged approach towards clean cooling. The first is enabling environment. We hope to support countries in moving from just policy to planning by helping countries to develop minimum energy performance standards and EPS, MEPS, labeling, building codes, and national cooling action plans. We also hope to support implementation. So we are not just focused on any specific technology, but more on integrated ideas. Therefore, in the cooling space, we are looking across the cooling supply chain, from net zero cooling to super efficient cooling. HFC phase down to equipment manufacturing, from cold chain to space cooling. Likewise, we are seeking to create new business models that can be sustainable and can bring in much needed private capital. And the GCF aims to do this by supporting replicable and scalable projects globally, establishing new markets or market trends, and develop sustainable financial products. To build a new climate future, the GCF have been actively working with its partners, which includes accredited entities, to develop projects and programs to address these challenges, as well as creating an enabling environment for targeted support. These initiatives, together with UNEP and the Cool Coalition, along with other partners who joined us today, including the International Energy Agency, the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, tells me that we are headed in the right direction to meet the challenges. I would like to thank our co-host, UNEP, especially Mark Radka and his team, for their full support in organizing this webinar. And we hope that this serves as a venue to share and come up with collective voice for cooling towards the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerry, and thank you very much for those encouraging words, as well as the depth and the breadth of where we see cooling headed, and then the opportunities there as well, and then the role that the GCF can actually play with all of our partners, as well as you, dear audience, to make this happen. Like I said, we have a good lineup of panelists today to talk about the different aspects of cooling. So let me get this started as well. So I would like to introduce to you Ms. Melanie Slade from the International Energy Agency. Melanie is the Senior Program Manager for Energy Efficiency in the Emerging Economies. She's been doing a lot of work in both in energy efficiency as well as in the cooling space as well. And the right person to really kind of talk to us about the cooling sector and its impact on climate. Over to you, Melanie.
Thank you very much, Sabine and Hamad as well. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you. So I'd like to start by, next slide please, introducing our most recent collaboration on cooling with, of course, with the United Nations Environment Programme, with KSEP, and with the support of 30 authors and 30 plus technical reviewers. So this is the Cooling Emissions and Policy Synthesis report that was published about 10 days ago, and covers quite a lot of the ground that Herman just introduced. But one of the key things I'd like to focus on in this short period is the appliance use, and the fact that we estimate that there are 3.6 billion appliances in use now, and there'll be a need for 14 billion by 2050, and that's the challenge that we face. So there is a great opportunity for action, but we really need to accelerate action. I want to introduce this subject, focusing on, just as an example, room air conditioning, And I want to do that because I want to demonstrate that even though technology is available, it's not being adopted, efficient technologies not being adopted at the rate that's necessary. And so that this isn't just a technology issue, it's very, very much a policy issue too. So next slide, please. So as Haman said, keeping cool is a growing need. And we have a warming world, so we're increasing the need for cooling there, but we also have increasing wealth. So we have people who have the ability to access cooling as well. And this goes across, of course, the whole spectrum of air conditioning in homes, but also in cold chains, in offices. We have lots of evidence to say that cooling provides increased levels of comfort, of course, but productivity too. So we need cooling. It's not something we shouldn't be seeing this as a negative. It's got to happen, but it needs to happen in the most efficient way. Next slide, please. This is the challenge, that there are 2.8 billion people living in places where it's hot every day, not just seasonally, every day. And at the moment, only 8% of them have an air conditioning. Next slide, please. So as Haman said, air conditioning rates are expected to soar. This chart's showing us what the ownership was like for air conditioners 3 decades ago, back in 1990. We had the US, Japan, and China dominating even then. Next slide, please. And by mid this decade, those 3 countries are still dominant, but there are other big markets starting to appear. Next slide, please. And by 2050, we expect that about 2/3 of the world's households would have an air conditioner, but China, India, and Indonesia will account for half of all air conditioning units in buildings. So hugely important focus for attention going forward. Next slide, please. This is the good news and the bad news. So starting with what markets look like today, say. So the blue bars on this chart show the range of air conditioners that are available in the countries listed at the bottom of the chart. So huge range of efficiency available. But the not so good news is the market average is only about 1/3 of the available technology in these markets. So this is why I want to use this as an illustration that this is not a technology problem. It's something that we need to address with policy and with finance, hence the group of organisations who've got together to talk about this today. Next slide, please. This is the good news. We as Haman said, we need air conditioning efficiency to double by 2040. But this green line on this chart shows that in those large markets that we're saying are going to be responsible or are responsible for and will be increasingly responsible for the energy consumption from air conditioning, there are already products available that are at the efficiency levels we need to see, but they're not being bought widely by consumers. We are seeing, and I know friend Nihar at LBNL would say the same thing, we are seeing that many governments say that they can't have more stringent maps because the products are going to be too expensive for their consumers. But we're not seeing the correlation between price and efficiency that the people assume is there. So the more efficient air conditioners don't need to cost more than the market average in many parts of the world. And this is already happening today. So what we're saying is the technology is there, the products are already in the market, but they're not being bought. So we need, like I said, the policy and the finance in place to make that change. Next slide, please. So these improved air conditioners that we know we can access. The left-hand chart here shows the cumulative investment in power generation for space cooling that we predict would happen by 2050 if we don't take an efficient cooling scenario. in the dark blue bar, and then the savings made through the efficient cooling scenario. So we think that there'd be, 1.2 trillion could be saved in power generation investments, and that's just the generation capacity itself. It's more than double that. It comes to 2.9 trillion, we think, if you take all the transmission and distribution equipment into account as well. And also, access to cooling can be improved to individuals, because the electricity costs per capita can be reduced significantly, can be about halved, which is what the right-hand chart here shows us. Next slide, please. And a lot of this conversation, of course, is driven by climate, by combating climate change, by the issue with emissions. And we can show here the contribution more efficient space cooling can make to a reduction in CO2 emissions. So we have on the left-hand side here, 2016, our starting year for this analysis. We have our reference scenario, which is what would happen if nothing changed. We have the opportunity for efficiency in air conditioners, and this multicolored bar in the middle is broken actually down by country, so it shows us where the most savings can be made. We also have the opportunity. Energy efficiency helps us to decarbonize the power sector. Energy efficiency helps us bring in high proportions of renewables, so that assists this process too. And then right at the right-hand side, we have the emissions that could be achieved if we follow this efficient cooling path. So this is today's technology. We just have to find a way of making it happen. Next slide, please. Just in summary, we've seen that cooling appliance ownership is rising rapidly. It's got to happen. It needs to happen. People need cooling, but we need it to be more efficiently done. Even in the simplest example that we have, which is room air conditioners, where we have the technology, we know what to do, it's not happening. So if you think about how more difficult it's going to be in the more complex areas of cold chain, then I'm trying to emphasize that it's, like I say, not just a technical issue, because we aren't getting the simplest area here right yet. So policy can improve the efficiency of new equipment, and we need the investment. Now, we have opportunities at the moment. We have opportunities through new financing models, but we also have opportunities through the COVID-19 pandemic recovery packages that governments are designing at the moment. Governments are designing packages to incentivize purchase of appliances. There's an opportunity to say they must be highly efficient. And governments are also supporting industry at the moment, manufacturing industry. It's possible also there to say support's available if more efficient products are being made. There are opportunities that exist in the coming months. We have this window that we need to take advantage of. And hopefully through conversations like the one we're having today, we'll find the way forward to do that. The IEA has lots of analysis on these recovery packages on the website. Others, of course, are also doing similar analysis. So we need to find ways of harnessing that. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to questions later.
Thank you so much, Mel, and thank you so much for setting the stage. I mean, I think this is what we've been trying to say, as well as the demand is there, like Jerry mentioned, and then you have also stressed that. But the best thing that you said is the technology is already out there. I mean, it's not that we need to reinvent the wheel now. We already have the technology now. The thing is, how do we now bring it to scale? How do we really kind of use that efficiency in place so that we can really kind of get the right technology in the right places, so that we're really kind of doing something really great in the cooling space and really making an effort. And like you've also said, I think the issue is technology as well as policies, and then the different issues that go along with it. So which takes us right segue to our next speaker, Miss Lily Rehai, who is the coordinator, who's with the UN Environment, but also the coordinator for the Cool Coalition, which was, if I get this right, I think which was set up in New York a year ago. So this is so Lily will be basically talking about the next steps from what Mel just said is how do we now work with national cooling action plans? What are the best practices, some of the examples, and then to really kind of showcase how a policy level intervention could really help to basically enhance the use and the upscaling of clean and efficient cooling. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Sabine, and thank you for having me here. So maybe I'll just take a quick step back in my first slide to just linking back to what Mel said. I mean, we talk a lot about this being about technology solutions and also all the growth figures and GHG figures, but at the end of the day, you can imagine that maybe you're a rural farmer in India struggling to make your ends meet. You need to sell all of your crops, but a lack of cooling means half of your harvest is spoiled before it reaches market. Or whether you're this farmer or a nurse that wants to deliver medicine or a vaccine, especially during these times, or you're sweltering in your, I guess, home office, you really need cooling to protect your health, your livelihood, and your productivity. And that's really concrete, even in terms of productivity. I know the ILO predicts that you could have an estimated loss of over 2% of working hours worldwide, or up to 6% of GDP annually from not having sufficient access to cooling. So just to re-emphasize what Mel said is that we do need to increase access to cooling, and the growth is important, but we definitely need to manage this growth in a smart, efficient, climate-friendly manner in order to meet those needs. Next slide, please. And so, again, as was emphasized by other speakers, to transition to efficient climate-friendly cooling, we will need a really a mix of approaches that the policies need to tackle, and that is from efficient equipment or solar-powered ACs or smart buildings, urban form, nature-based cooling solutions. It's a diverse mix of solutions that we need to tackle this problem. And crucially, there is this unique opportunity with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which is phasing down the HFCs. And as was said earlier, phasing down these HFCs by end of century is a 0.4 degree of avoided warming, and integrating energy efficiency into that phase down to do it simultaneously will double those climate benefits by the end of the century. And I think the most recent report showed that Mel was citing also showed that over 40 years that would be avoiding 4 to 8 years of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's really significant. And so that's a little bit the vision of the Cool Coalition, which was launched last year. And it is really to help countries meet the cooling demand through this comprehensive approach and maximize the climate and development benefits. And so the question is, how do we do that? Practically speaking, and national cooling action plans is one of the key areas, key policy actions that we see as important to actually bring these different sectors, you can say, or different refrigerant transition, energy efficiency, and all the different cross-sectoral actions together to maximize those benefits. Next slide, please. So it's, of course, not only the Cool Coalition and the partners who speak of the importance of national cooling action plans, but it is important to note that the Secretary General has also emphasized that this is an important policy solution that all countries should adopt in order to accelerate, or can adopt in order to accelerate the transition to efficient climate-friendly cooling. So, well, I mean, we all know that you can only manage or improve what you can measure. So that is, of course, a key role of a national cooling action plan, is to be able to set a baseline and understand how future projected growth interventions in cooling across different sectors will impact your economy, will impact climate, will impact your goals in terms of policy or international agreements like Kigali, Paris Agreement, SDGs. But I would say equally important is the role of NCAP on governance, because it's very nice and easy to say we should integrate these different sectors, but very often it's a lot of stakeholders that don't speak to each other. So the people who are working on HFC phase down are not necessarily speaking to the people who are working on energy efficiency policy, and so on and so on. I mean, cooling cuts across multiple ministries, you know, whether it's agriculture, buildings, etc. So you have a lot of different actors to bring together, not to mention also industry that needs to come together for this to work, and civil society. So the NCAP is important not only for setting baselines and intervention scenarios and setting market signals and targets, but also it's very important for the governance process. And we see that many countries have started to already bring together or harmonize different policies across sectors through national cooling action plans and integrate efficiency in the cooling sector. So India was one of the first ones with a very comprehensive national cooling action plan. Of course, given the size of the market in India, it was resembling the size of the size of the NCAP resembles the size of the country in the effort. And that was then followed by China, Rwanda, Trinidad and Tobago, Lebanon, etc., Cuba. So these countries have all already established national cooling action plans. And then with the support of the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, another 20 countries, over 20 countries are currently at different stages of development of NCAPs. And that's largely with the support of UNEP and UNDP, but of course others are also participating in supporting countries on NCAPs. So why do I say that? Well, what we're doing in the Cool Coalition, together with all of the entities who have developed national cooling action plans, which are listed in the PowerPoint, we are developing some kind of a model guideline that can be flexibly used for each country to develop national cooling action plans. And I'll just give you maybe one example, which is the example of India, since it is the most comprehensive one. So some key elements of the India National Cooling Action Plan development process, which also reflects in a lot of the other cooling action plans we've been reviewing and looking at. First is, of course, that you really need to have a champion and a strong objective. So in India, I think there was a really important champion in terms of the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change, the National Ozone Cell, where they really wanted to take advantage of this doubling that we just mentioned in terms of integration of energy efficiency with refrigerant transition. So they really had the political will and leadership to want to develop a plan that harmonized energy efficiency with HVAC appliances and refrigerant transition pathways for enhanced climate action. There was also recognition in India amongst everyone that there's low access to cooling and that there will be significant growth in demand. There was a need to do some kind of outlook to increase access, but also manage the demand, as we've discussed. So those were very important objectives and a champion, but actually the NCAP was an extremely collaborative process. So they set up a although the ozone cell was sort of championing it, and sort of the nodal agency spearheading it, there was a collaboration framework set up with ministries. As you can see, I've not even listed all of them, but they're all, you can see some here. The Ministry of Power, Ministry of Road and Transport, Highways, Ministry of Agriculture, so on and so forth, were all brought together with industry, civil society, research and development, in order to actually develop the National Cooling Action Plan. And that was really very, again, important, what I was saying before in terms of breaking silos and raising awareness of the relevance of cooling for the different stakeholders and helping people that don't talk to each other to actually talk to each other and share knowledge with each other. There was six sectors that were chosen to be tackled, or well, the 6 sectors, the way they divided it is seen below. And what is important there is that each sector was then set up with a working group, and that working group, which comprised of these different entities, developed the data and scenario for each of those sectors. I'm assuming everyone can see my slide, so I'm not reading everything on the slide, but the examples are space cooling in buildings, mobile air conditioning, cold chain, and so on and so forth. Next slide. So what was done then in every one of these sectors was a baseline scenario of the existing cooling demand, and then what would be the future cooling demand under different scenarios, so business as usual and intervention scenarios. And that then determined the logic behind the recommendations, targets, and priority areas that were set out in the final policy document of the National Cooling Action Plan. So that was done. What's important, a few things that we pulled out is that, first of all, you are looking at, when you're looking at intervention scenarios, it's important to also look at what is the role of existing frameworks and policies and projects, so that you can really get an NCAP to be integrated into the existing policy frameworks of the country, because often you may already have a minimum energy performance standard, or you may already have other policies in place that are important, building energy codes, etc. And so you want to be able to build on those. They looked at met and unmet demand. They were looking at all the relevant sectors. You see that active and passive cooling, refrigerant, non-refrigerant technologies, and emerging in-kind technologies were looked at. And they had a monitoring framework using the existing steering committee under the Montreal Protocol to monitor then the recommendations that came out. Next slide. Okay, I think I'm gonna just be a bit fast here. So just to give you an idea of what the structure looks like, what does an actual National Cooling Action Plan look like? You can see here that, as I've just given you the example of India, you can select the sectors that are your priority sectors, and we think that that should be flexible and depends on your priorities. You may not have a priority to look at mobile air conditioning, or it depends on what sectors are important to you in your country. Looking at those sectors is the key demand assessment that we just described, looking at baseline and future scenarios and suggested interventions. And then importantly is the recommendations and the implementation framework. And here I've just listed, by no means a full comprehensive example, but some examples that you'll hear also in this call today of some important recommendations that came out from both the India Action Plan and others that we've looked at, including MEPS, energy labels, building energy codes, nature-based solutions, operational efficiency, links to NDCs and HPMP updates, and et cetera. I don't want to list the whole thing. So please, next slide. Last slide. So in general, I took you through the example of India, and we've been, as I mentioned, pulling out the best practices to be captured in this model guidance. And just a few quick points to keep in mind to take away from this is the importance when you do a National Cooling Action Plan of, as mentioned, making sure there's a champion, making sure it's really multi-stakeholder. Often the National Ozone Unit is the starting point because they hold the cooling sector knowledge and they have the HPMPs, but of course you can start with other ministries as well. Having a very flexible framework so that you can adapt to your priorities, making sure you cover various sectors, so not only focusing on one, but really looking at multiple sectors so you can capture synergies across sectors. Looking at access, so SE4All has recently released their needs assessment, so looking at how you can also integrate considerations for access, and recommendations dovetailing with ongoing programs and policies, and finally making sure that this is a living document that can be revisited and updated as new technologies and more data comes online. And so with that, I will wrap up. I tried to give condensed overview of NCAP in 10 minutes, and hope that that's been helpful. And next slide, please do be in touch if you would like to work with us on our national cooling action plans. And I know that as you'll hear later today, GCF is also, and Sabine also mentioned, is supporting NDAs to use readiness funds to develop NCAPs if there is interest. So we hope that you will develop an NCAP. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lily. I mean, we gave you a hard job of, putting all of the NCAPs in 10 minutes, and it is a lot of new things that is needed. And then, like you said, and I think the good thing is there's a lot of things there, but you've also come up with saying that you guys are actually developing guidelines for NCAP, so which is, I think, much needed, and to really kind of, help countries to really orient their vision in terms of how they see their national cooling action plan going, and what's going to be the most effective way for them to lead this on as well. So yeah, I think that, and then as like you said, I think we just don't hope that the NDAs will take on the NCAPs as readiness, but they will. So we're looking forward to that as well. And I think just to kind of, there's a lot of points that Lily mentioned in the NCAPs, as well as also Mel also mentioned on minimum energy performance standards. And I think those are the key things to really kind of build an enabling environment where we can really make, cooling efficient cooling happen in terms of, investments as well as upscaling. So on this vein of thought, I would like to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Patrick Blake from United Efficiency in UNEP, and Patrick will be talking about the topic, minimum energy performance standards, labeling and model regulations as it pertains to efficient cooling devices. Patrick, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sabin, for the introduction. And as Sabin said, I'll speak on the topics of minimum energy performance standards, MEPS, labeling, and a bit on supporting policies. I'll try to fit it in within a reasonable time. Again, I'm from a UN Environment program working on United for Efficiency, a global program for energy efficiency in focused products and use products, including room air conditioners, refrigerators, and also lighting and electric motors and distribution transformers. Typically, these are the larger consuming products in a country and also globally. Thanks, and if you could just click a few times. So diving into the different, into the topic of my presentation, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the role of minimum energy performance standards and energy labels, which is the main focus of the presentation. So as you see shown visually on this slide, minimum energy performance standards eliminate the least efficient products from the market, and that sets the floor for the market. And here you see that depicted with refrigerators and air conditioners, but of course can apply to other cooling products as well. And through that increases the efficiency of the products sold in a market or in a region for those products. Even more than that, though, there's other opportunities to increase efficiency, and that can be through labels, communicating to the consumer, also financial mechanisms to help for the purchase of more efficient products. And then throughout that is the need for market monitoring and surveillance, so testing of products, and ensuring that products on the market are compliant. So through that is what we've called the integrated policy approach, and provides the role for MEPs, but then also role for higher efficient products as well. Next slide, please. And then just a brief overview of where MEPs are in place globally. This is for air conditioners and refrigerators. So through the green, you see the MEPs that are in place. In the dark green, mandatory, then some voluntary, and then some in development. And what this shows is that there are a good status of MEPs in place, but that doesn't quite tell the whole story. That some policies, as you see in red, are out of date or unenforced. So there's still work needs to be done, and it's not a one-off. It's not one-off that once MEPs are developed, that all the work is done. Of course, as time goes and the technology advances, that there is a need to update those MEPs to be more stringent, to have a higher efficiency level. Next slide, please. So through this work, we've developed what we call model regulation guidelines. And this is really responding, as we saw on the previous slide, to the lack of policies in some countries or lack of consistency, and also to the growth that we saw earlier on in the presentation from Melanie, that the growth of these products in the coming years is increasing and is already increasing. So there's a need for this. So what we developed is what we call the model regulation guidelines. And this is a template for countries to use when developing minimum energy performance standards. It's intended as guidance to help inform regulatory authorities and policymakers. It sets that minimum energy efficiency floor to prohibit future sales. And it references global technology. We looked at the trends globally as far as policy, but also as far as the technology of the focus products on air conditioners and refrigerators to see where that was headed and set the MEPs accordingly. We're working on deploying this in several countries, but then also at the regional level as well. And just to mention a few, that includes in Southeast Asia, Southern Africa, and East Africa. It's available in a number of languages, as you see written on the slide, in English, Spanish, Chinese, Portuguese, and French, and Arabic coming soon as well. Next slide, please. Then to focus a bit on labeling. Labeling also, through this, plays an important role in helping on the informational barrier for energy efficiency. That when a consumer goes to the store, they may not understand the impact of the consumption of that product. So labels can help with that to inform the consumer, and you see a few examples of that on the right-hand side. So a lot of them on the comparative side, in the EU, in Ghana, and the Republic of Korea, where there's a scale for efficiency. And you see some with the letters and the bars that's been used in the EU. Some other countries in Ghana you see with the stars, and then also the numbers as well. So there's different ways to go about this. And that's on a comparative label, so comparing the efficiency of the products against each other. And then another way is also on an endorsement label, so to communicate it for certain products that meet the higher efficiency. And then on through this, we've developed, again, or we soon will be releasing step-by-step guidance to help country policymakers on development of that. Next slide, please. Then I just want to provide a few examples of this work, one at the national level and then one at the regional level, that I hope can help inform other countries of a path to take as far as developing MEPs, labeling, and some of the other activities that were mentioned previously in the other presentation. So One project, one country that we're working with very closely is in Rwanda. And we have two parts to that project, one more policy and one more financing. And this is supported also by the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program. And it brings together at the national level the different focal points, both on the ozone side and also on the energy side, to work together with them and other partners as well, including the regional center, EACRI, and our partners at BASE as well. In that project, we've developed, as Lily said, a national cooling action plan. And also through that has been development of MEPs and labeling on the focus products of refrigerators and air conditioners. But it also brings together the financing side. So development of a cool lease, leasing of cooling products in the commercial sector, and then on-bill financing for the residential sector. So it brings together the different policy and financing mechanisms that can help in the market transformation. As one example of how a country can develop a project for energy efficient and low global warming potential refrigerants. Next slide, please. Then at the regional level, I wanted to highlight the opportunity to work together regionally as well. Earlier on in my presentation, I showed the status of policies in place globally. And those are in place, but in some countries, but we don't see a harmonization of products, of policies and standards in those countries. So we also have worked at the regional level, including here you see in Southeast Asia. We've previously worked on the lighting side and on air conditioning, and at the moment, working together with the ASEAN Center for Energy, International Institute for Energy Conservation, and our partners at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab to support the updates of the air conditioner MEPs in the ASEAN region. So through that, we are adapting the MEPs that have been developed for the model regulations that have been developed separately at the global level, adapting those for the national level. And that project's really getting started and will go into next year. Next slide, please. And my last slide. So to conclude very briefly, I wanted to highlight the need to implement MEPs and labeling to help address the large growth that is expected in these products, and the opportunity to not only focus on the efficiency side, but also on the refrigerant side. So doing those two aspects together and working with the different stakeholders to do so. In addition to that, as I just mentioned on the harmonization, thinking through not only on development of projects at the national level, but possibly also you could consider developing those at the regional level as well. And then finally, second to last, on the tools and templates, there's a number under our projects that I highlighted on the model regulations and others as well. And there's others from other organizations as well. And I would encourage you to use those as you do develop GCF readiness projects. And then finally, we're here to work together with you and with other partners on the call and other stakeholders for development of projects, because there's a lot of experience that could be built upon together with those partners. So thanks again. I look forward to the questions and I look forward to working with the GCF and the different partners on the cooling sector. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. It was very informative as well. I mean, I think one of the key highlights that I would like to stress from your presentation is, one, labeling and MEPs. I mean, these are really key barrier busters for energy efficiency and the visibility to really kind of get out there that you are actually using an energy efficient equipment. which is kind of lacking in the energy efficiency space, and which really does hinder the upscale of energy efficiency, both in the cooling and the other parts. And then the other part that I would like to really kind of stress is, MEPS as well as NCAPs, they are nationally built, but there is a lot to be gained by looking at it from a regional perspective as well, and harmonizing it as a region, and then kind of bringing it down to a country level. And I think that that's something that we should also be looking into from a country perspective, from a regional perspective, because a lot of the trade in efficient air conditioning does happen in the regional basis. That having the same type of equipment with the same type of energy performance standards makes it much more easier to do cost boundary imports and exports of these materials. So thank you very much. Having said that, I think now we would kind of like to switch gears a little bit from energy use in equipments and national planning, looking at it at the other side of the cooling equation, the refrigerants. And for that, we have two esteemed colleagues from the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, Ambereen Shafee and Nihar Shah, who will be talking about different opportunities on energy efficiency improvement through the refrigerant transition under the Montreal Protocol. Over to you, the tandem of Ambereen and Nihar.
Thanks, Sabeen. I'd like to thank UNEP and the Green Climate Fund for this opportunity, and thank you all for your attention. It's a little past midnight in sunny California, so I ask your patience if I stumble a little bit because it's pretty late here. But we're going to be talking about opportunities for funding efficiency improvement by the Green Climate Fund with the refrigerant transition under the Montreal Protocol. And I'll be doing the presentation, as Sabeen mentioned, with my colleague Ambereen as well, and we will be switching back and forth. So we're from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Next slide, please. Little introduction to us. We're managed by the University of California for the United States Department of Energy. We have about 13 Nobel Prizes in our history, about 4,200 employees, and we're dedicated to solving the most pressing scientific problems facing humanity. We have more than 2 decades of work internationally on various different aspects, significant focus on energy efficiency, including technical support to the US Department of Energy's appliance standard rulemaking. And Ambereen and I also provided technical support for the Kigali Amendment negotiations and continue to provide support for the Montreal Protocol negotiations as well. And recently, we've been working to support market transformation programs for efficient air conditioners and refrigerators in various countries, including China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Egypt, Indonesia, and also help develop the U4E model regulations that Patrick was talking about. And then earlier, Berkeley Lab also provided technical support for manufacture of super efficient CFC-free refrigerators during the previous refrigerant transition. Next slide, please. Ambereen.
Thanks so much, Nihar, for introducing that, and thanks to the Green Climate Fund and UN Environment for having us. So the opportunity in cooling, we've heard a lot of statistics. We've already heard our colleagues explain the problem of cooling efficiency and the opportunity as well. I'm going to briefly touch on these points. On the left side of this particular slide, we see a very common graph in the cooling efficiency world. So the top line, or the red line, represents a business as usual scenario. And the very bottom line represents what can be achieved when controlling CO2s and the emissions of short-lived climate pollutants, of which hydrofluorocarbons is one. So that is, both interventions are needed in order to reach a 2 degrees Celsius scenario, which was outlined by the Paris Agreement goals. On the right side of the slide represents a very simple concept that the impact of energy efficiency is much higher than many significant renewable energy policies like China's Three Gorges Dam or India's solar mission. So that's the basic point on this slide. Next slide, please. For those folks who are more on the Green Climate Fund side and do not have as much familiarity with the Montreal Protocol, I want to briefly explain where the Montreal Protocol is with respect to energy efficiency and the refrigerant transition. So the Montreal Protocol parties at the 30th meeting discussed energy efficiency investment and relied heavily on the Energy Efficiency Task Force within their Technology and Economic Assessment Panel. So the TEEP-EE Task Force panel put together a report and which essentially recommended that the Montreal Protocol parties develop an appropriate liaison with funding institutions that share common goals with the Montreal Protocol, and to investigate funding architectures that serve that purpose. And in relying on this report, the Montreal Protocol parties took several decisions reaffirming and echoing those same points in the TEEP report, to look at shared objectives with funding institutions like the Green Climate Fund. Next slide, please. So in exploring the joint investment in energy efficiency and the refrigerant transition, there are several different questions that arise. And some of these questions are laid out here in this slide. So a couple of them are, the refrigerant and air conditioning appliances are often the first products targeted for energy efficiency programs, and they typically will undergo, and they will undergo a refrigerant transition under the Kigali Amendment. The second point is that the Multilateral Fund already funds the incremental costs of the refrigerant transition for so-called Article 5 parties, which most developing countries fit into. So the Multilateral Fund is the funding arm of the Montreal Protocol. It's a revolving fund that is topped up every 3 years, and that already funds the refrigerant transition. Refrigerant transition and efficiency improvement both require typically a redesign of appliances and retooling of manufacturing lines. So the main point is co-funding allows both funders of the refrigerant transition and energy efficiency to save money and maximize benefits from investment, whether they are climate co-benefits or other benefits. So for example, manufacturers save money because they only have to redesign or retool once. Consumers save money by lowering their energy costs, and utilities will save money by reducing their overall and peak electricity demand. Next slide, please. Nihar can explain this slide pretty briefly.
Yeah, so thank you, Amberine. So we think that the Green Climate Fund could plan investments in cooling by considering beginning from MLF-approved projects or Montreal Protocol projects as a starting point, partly to avoid deployment of high GWP refrigerants. And another way of thinking about both energy efficiency and refrigerant transition, they're similar, but they're also different. And you see here, the way that I like to think about it is that energy efficiency is continuous, while refrigerant transition represents a step change. So that's another reason why starting from the refrigerant transition makes sense in terms of thinking about these energy efficiency investments. Partly, energy efficiency, is continuous because standards and labels are updated every few years, while the refrigerant transition is a sectoral transition over many decades. On the energy efficiency side, you'll see many different energy efficiency levels for any particular equipment on any market, while on the refrigerant side, you'll only see one or a few refrigerants for any particular sector. And then again, on energy efficiency, there are typically various funding sources, while on the refrigerant transition, it's usually funded only by the Montreal Protocol. So that's part of the reason why it actually makes sense to start, if we're thinking about combining this, to start from the Montreal Protocol MLF-approved projects, and then to consider some level of cost-effective energy efficiency investment. Next slide, please.
So again, the coordinated efficiency improvement with the refrigerant transition can keep costs low, reduce risk, and shorten payback for consumers, manufacturers, utilities, and funders. But there's a list of considerations that we have to think about when we talk about coordinating funding with the refrigerant transition and energy efficiency. So we've set out a few here in this slide. So a couple of these considerations, the refrigerant transition obviously has an impact on energy efficiency. So that means by switching out the refrigerant or switching out the chemical, there is an impact on energy efficiency. And so you want to avoid double counting. You want to be able to capture the co-benefits of both. Indirect climate benefits from energy efficiency savings are not actually currently considered in Montreal Protocol project funding. One important consideration is that not all energy efficiency investments are equal. Different peak load climate and energy impacts are vary by economy and sector. A question that arises often is, can efficiency and refrigerant transition be invested at the same level, and what does same mean? And of course, the level of energy efficiency that can be targeted and how to allocate costs between those two goals. Next slide, please. So keeping in mind the benefits of joint investment, as well as the considerations and issues that arise when considering this particular joint investment, we've developed a particular tool to address those considerations. And it's the Joint Investment Framework tool, which addresses barriers to co-financing energy efficiency and the refrigerant transition. So there are three key features of the tool, and we will go into more detail here in the presentation, but these are the three key things that we hope you can walk away from this presentation knowing about joint investment, and specifically the Joint Investment Framework tool. So the first key feature is that it relies on publicly available data on the cost of efficiency improvement. Second feature is that it is a flexible tool for planning and evaluation of energy efficiency projects coordinated with refrigerant transition projects. And it's flexible because it's built to consider the various goals of any particular funder or evaluator who's using the tool. And the third piece, which Nihar has already mentioned, it enables the already made pipeline of projects in the Montreal Protocol to be leveraged for energy efficiency improvement. Next slide, please. In developing the tool, we've considered multiple ingredients, and each of which relies on publicly available data. And this is a more comprehensive list, but I'm going to focus on the last three bullet points because we will be discussing these in more detail in the presentation. So one of the ingredients in the Joint Investment Framework tool is the manufacturing cost versus efficiency curves, which are used and actually developed by the Lawrence Berkeley Lab and are used by the US Department of Energy's energy efficiency standards rulemakings, and they're extended to other countries like China and India, which we know are very important in this discussion. And the manufacturer impact analysis, such as those that are also developed by the Berkeley Lab for the same purpose in the US DOE's standards process, to estimate the cost of retooling manufacturing lines for energy efficiency. And the last is the efficiency and capacity of alternate refrigerants from testing programs, which is actually represented in the next slide. Next slide, please. Go ahead.
Thanks, Green. Yeah, so when looking at the impact of refrigerant on energy efficiency, there's various kinds of publicly available information. There's a number of different testing programs that have looked at this, and many of them are listed here. But the results you see essentially show that refrigerants actually have either increased efficiency or decreased efficiency, and there's many complicated kind of results that need to be included as part of the consideration. And so you'll see the results are shown here from the AHRI low GWP refrigerant evaluation program. So these are results that we've incorporated in the design of the Joint Investment Framework tool. Next slide, please. Also, if you look at the Department of Energy's efficiency standards process, there's many different analyses that we do. The foundational one is the engineering analysis, which essentially you come up with an incremental manufacturing cost for each level of energy efficiency. And then you have many different analyses that are built on that foundational analysis. Each of those analyses can give you a different kind of cost effectiveness metric, as well as an estimate of the energy efficiency investment need when you're going from one level of efficiency to another. So essentially, the tool can be used to actually come up with many different types of cost effectiveness metrics. So depending on the perspective of the program design, you can actually, like if you have a climate project like the Green Climate Fund, you would probably use the climate cost effectiveness metric. But you could also potentially design a consumer or other type of incentive program if you wanted to as well. Next slide, please. So here's some examples. This table on the left is an example of the work we did in India, showing the different technologies, the corresponding energy savings, and then the corresponding incremental manufacturing costs. That's also represented in graphical form in the chart in the middle. Essentially, this bottom-up engineering analysis was used to design the energy efficiency standard for air conditioners in India in 2016, and also used to design the specifications for the bulk procurement program that was done right after. Similar data was used to design China's new energy efficiency standard for room air conditioners in March 2020. And the result that you see at the bottom right is essentially showing the cost effectiveness and the energy savings, net savings from different levels of efficiency. The efficiency level is represented on the x-axis. But essentially, this is showing you that you can actually design many different types of cost effectiveness metrics using this kind of information as a foundation to actually design your energy efficiency project. Next slide, please. So finally, in terms of the joint investment framework, we can also come up with an investment need for the energy efficiency project. So here you see actually a summary of the US DOE rulemaking that shows you the capital conversion costs for different efficiency levels. This is an industry-wide conversion cost, but of course it can also be customized for a particular industry or a particular country. And so the point here is that you actually get an estimate of the manufacturing conversion cost that comes out of the tool as well. And this was, of course, used also in the Montreal Protocol TEEP Energy Efficiency Task Force that was referred to earlier. Next slide. So in summary, starting from the Montreal Protocol refrigerant projects, basically you can design an equivalent energy efficiency project based on the particular perspective, identify a corresponding benefit, a target efficiency level, and a corresponding investment need or dollar amount that might go with that. So you really have a pipeline starting from the Montreal Protocol projects of energy efficiency projects that can be designed based on those. We basically use publicly available data from many different sources, including the US DOE rulemakings in designing these energy efficiency investments. And of course, these can be customized for economy and sector-specific investments, adjusting for many different factors that you see listed here. And essentially, we think that this can be used, again, the readiness funds that were referred to earlier can be used potentially to design energy efficiency projects starting from the Montreal Protocol refrigerant projects. And we hope many of you avail yourselves of this opportunity. And if you have questions, of course, we're happy to take them at the end. Amberine, next slide, please.
So the Kigali Amendment offers an opportunity to simultaneously improve energy efficiency along with the refrigerant transition. With the Kigali Amendment and the related energy efficiency decisions of the parties to consider co-funding energy efficiency and liaisoning with funds like the Green Climate Fund, the Montreal Protocol has essentially become a climate treaty in many ways. There are significant co-benefits to this dual investment or joint investment strategy. It provides funding and also support to energy security, climate co-benefits, peak load benefits, and billions of dollars saved. Coordination of efficiency improvement along with the refrigerant transition will likely lower costs in comparison to separate implementation, which of course maximizes climate benefits. And as we outlined earlier, refrigerant transition is a step change, while energy efficiency improvement is continuous, which leads us to the conclusion that we could start from MLF-approved projects in looking at energy efficiency improvement. The refrigerant transition itself has an impact on energy efficiency that can also be accounted for from the testing results. And so the joint investment framework can prevent double counting of benefits. And the cost versus efficiency data that we've summarized here in our various examples will help calculate multiple cost-effective levels of efficiency improvement, consumer, climate, utility, et cetera, which can map on to different energy efficiency funding levels or goals. And that allows flexibility in decision-making through the joint investment framework tool. So that is our presentation. We want to mention also that we will be publishing a paper this year on specifically focused on the joint investment framework and strategy. So we're happy to distribute this to anybody who's in attendance today if they would like to see it. And you can go to the next slide. If anyone has questions or comments, you can feel free to contact us. and will be available for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Marine and Nihar. This was a really good step into, from, like I said, from use to refrigerant transition. And then it's really good to understand from your side that, refrigerant transition is a step change. It's a one-time thing, whereas energy efficiency is a gradual change. So therefore, kind of having that joint investment framework that kind of marries the two together could be a good way of really looking at, how we build energy efficiency projects on cooling. And then the other part is really kind of, bringing in the whole Montreal Protocol, which is one of the most successful protocols in the world, into the climate space through this is also another great thing to really kind of keep this momentum going as well. So thank you again. And keeping in the vein of investments and financing, our next presenter is my colleague from the Green Climate Fund, Eduardo Freitas, who is the regional manager for Africa in our country division of country programming. And so Eduardo is really going to take you on what is our readiness. You've heard a lot about readiness from the beginning till, and then what are and how is that going to be put into play, and how that can actually support clean cooling as we go forward as one of the financing modalities that's an offer from the GCF. Over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Sabin. And let me join my colleagues in thanking UNEP and my colleague panelists here for helping making this webinar possible with all the work put into this. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. As Sabin mentioned, I will use this presentation to share what is the spirit and the mechanics of the Readiness Program. You'll see that the slides are very short, but I'm leaving also my email address there in this first slide. So please, for the participants in this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me. If we don't have time to take all your questions during the Q&A sessions, we'd be glad to follow up with you and our national designator authorities and work together to explain this in more detail. I recognize that many of you are not familiar with the Readiness Program, so I'll try to give a bit of that idea of where it is coming from, as well as a bit of the mechanics. But again, this will be touched on rather briefly, but we'll have time in the Q&As to get into more details. So this first slide, thank you, Irene, for changing. This first slide is a slide that I think is very interesting to start with, because it illustrates what a programming cycle with the GCF would look like. And right in the center of it, you see the objective or the position, as we see, of the Readiness Program. You will see that we start on the left-hand side by the country's strategic climate documents, the NDCs and NAPs, the LEDs, etc., all the way going to the right-hand side to the development of project proposals that request GCF investments, which was what we call the funding proposals. Please keep in mind that this slide here in the sequence of steps is here just for illustrational purposes. We don't mandate or oblige any country, any partner to follow these steps, but it makes it easier for us to explain what readiness can do when it comes to the GCF environment. So we start from the left-hand side with what you see there as country and entity program. These are the documents that we believe we strongly encourage countries and the partners that work with us, the accredited entities to the GCF, to develop as a way of presenting to us what their plans are for their engagement with the GCF. So basically, this lays down what they want to work with when they're thinking about the GCF. And of course, through this step, they would eventually get to indicating to us what are the project concepts that they're working on. We'd work together with them to make these projects become developed in a manner that allows it to be presented to the board of the GCF for approval. But it is here that I think that the readiness and another tool that you see there more to the right-hand side called PPF, which means Project Preparation Facility, come into play. A country could think about using the readiness. By the way, I should have started by saying that the readiness is a financial tool of the GCF. It allows countries to tap into grants, non-reimbursable grants. I'll talk more about this in a minute. I'll let you know what are the amounts involved. But think about non-reimbursable grants here, both for the readiness program as for the project preparation facility. So a country could use the readiness grants to eliminate any identified gaps that they believe hinder development of their project proposals. These are less project-related gaps than the PPFs are. I'll get there too in a minute. But these, when you're talking about readiness, you're talking about institutional capacities, strategic planning, and early stages of project development. Think, for instance, of a project idea that needs to be further developed to reach a stage or a format in which could allow it to be presented to the GCF in the form of a concept note. You could use readiness for that. Up to $1 million per country per year is available for what we call standard readiness, but our board of the GCF has also created another package of money, another bucket of $3 million. This is not per year, this is only per country. It's a one-time only usage for national adaptation plans and adaptation planning processes. So think about the $1 million unless you're considering their adaptation linkages as well. But again, I'll speak more about these in a minute. Considering a country has already presented their concepts, and I refer to this because this was mentioned by my fellow panelists today. If a project is already in a shape of a concept note and it's being discussed with the GCF, we can also offer a second bucket of money, of resources, that's specifically targeted at the development of that specific transaction, that project, so it can be presented to the board. This is so just so we make sure that the gaps or the difficulties that any institution has to develop a funding proposal for the GCF can be eliminated through consulting service, any type of work that an institution needs to make it presentable to the GCF board. So the PPF here is another bucket of grants that's limited to up to $1.5 million per project. So this is not a cap on countries or an annual cap. This is available especially for what we call national entities or the direct access entities, apologies to the GCF, and for small, up to small scale projects. But it is open to any type of project. So I'll move to the next slide. Again, we can come back to more details that you see here in the picture. So in this slide, I wanted to give you an idea about the development stage of the readiness by showing you how many grants we've approved. So you see that they're globally, and these numbers are as of June, just 2 months ago, so they're not too outdated, and should have increased these numbers just a little bit by now. But we've approved over 380 grants right now to a tune of $250 million. We've disbursed already to 322 of these projects. Again, the other ones are in their contractual stages, and the disbursements made so far are over $107 million. Typically, we disburse in different installments, so that's why you see the difference between the total value of 250 and 107. About 100 and I think almost 140 countries, if I'm not mistaken, have already used readiness resources from the GCF. So on the bottom hand side of this slide, you'll see the $1 million there on the left. This typically is used for the strengthening of the capacities of our national designated authorities and the national institutions that are accredited for the GCF, which we call the DAEs, direct access entities. Second bullet point there, the $1 million can be used for strategic planning purposes. As examples, country programs and GCF strategic engagement plans, but these could be used also for sectoral developments and anything else that the country can see as strategic for their planning. And not only for the GCF, by the way, I should say, the GCF readiness program can support strategic climate planning and can support as well, to some extent, early stages of project development, even if the project doesn't necessarily aim the GCF as a partner. So the readiness program is very comprehensive and very flexible in that sense too. And of course, the last bullet point, access to climate finance. I've been discussing ways to do this, including the early development stages of a funding proposal. Noting that readiness could be used, and in the past, in the early years of the GCF, it was also used to finance the development of projects. But today, with the creation of the project preparation facility, we typically wouldn't recommend that any country taps into their $1 million of readiness annually to develop projects because they can use up to $1.5 million of the PPF for that purpose and maintain their $1 million of readiness for other purposes. On the right-hand side there, you see the $3 million cap per country. This is for national adaptation plans and adaptation planning processes. The next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is titled as What's New in Readiness because I wanted to, readiness is so, there's so many details there, but I wanted to use some recent developments of readiness to inform the audience today about what, also about what readiness already offered. So in the past until last year, any country could only plan and request approval to the GCF to use the up to $1 million that they have available annually. Of course, I'm not talking about the $3 million for adaptation planning. I'll leave it aside for now just to reduce complexity in this conversation. But they could only ask for the approval of up to $1 million. So that meant that if they plan to use $2 million, they'd have to make a request for the GCF today and then come back January next year for another $1 million. And we've removed that difficulty. So today, countries can come with a request for up to $3 million. That means that they are already using or planning to use their 3 years of $1 million caps, but they can request advanced approval to the GCF in one go. So they wouldn't have to come back next year and again in 2022. Of course, they can continue working with a 1-year readiness if they prefer to do so. The second box there talks about programmatic focus. In order to for the GCF to approve a request for over $1 million or for 3 years in length, we want to see, that's a decision that the board took. We want to see what is the country's strategic plan for the use of readiness resources. And this is because at the end of the day, we have to demonstrate, be able to speak for the results of the investment of these resources. So we need to understand and be comfortable enough with the fact that the country has developed the plan to use these up to $3 million. And typically this is of course attached to the strategies that the countries have developed as well, and to the needs and capacity needs, institutional needs, planning needs, project development needs that they've identified. So we want to see that programmatic focus there. We've expanded and detailed a little bit more the objective areas, but for this, I'll invite colleagues to look at the Readiness Guidebook. It's a pretty comprehensive document that's available on the GCF website. And if it's useful, I can perhaps share the link later with through colleagues, UNEP, or perhaps with anybody that reaches out to me. And of course, template changes, but let's not worry too much about that. The next slide, please. Finally, this is the second to last slide. I'll just finish by an example. I don't want to worry too much about the left-hand side of this. I just wanted to show you, for those that will get the slides and be able to read it later, that there are some steps in the approval of readiness proposals, so stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. But what I really wanted to focus on is the right-hand side here. We really strongly suggest that whoever wants to present a readiness request to the GCF works closely with the national designated authorities of the GCF, because only they can present the readiness request to the GCF. Think about also working together with our regional officers here at the GCF. I can put you in touch with all of them, because these are the colleagues here at the Secretariat who are making sure that the request complies with the needs of the GCF. So they can help you work throughout the development of this readiness request to make sure it'll be approved. Start early. Typically, it takes a few months, on average 6 months from the early drafts of the readiness proposal till the day it's approved. So think about that time frame. And note also that proposal will be counted towards the cap of that year on the date, considering the date of approval, not the date of submission. So that's also a question we often get. But I submitted the proposal in December, so I expected that to count for that year's annual cap. That's not the way we operate. It needs to be on the date of approval. And then the next slide, please. And this is my last one. This is one example of readiness activities we've approved in the past. My colleagues, the other panelists gave excellent examples from Rwanda, from India. As I was looking through those slides, I was seeing things there that the GCF readiness can now also support. So please keep those in mind as well as you think about what your country needs, because it's very possible that we can say yes to those activities. But you see here on this slide things that we have already done. These are examples from Africa, just approved last December. which are talking about maps and labeling schemes and national policy roadmaps, enabling environments, financing mechanisms, strengthen capacities. So this relates a lot, as I could see, to points and work that other institutions present here are doing as well. Sabin, I'll stop here and notice that we're 25 minutes past the scheduled time, so we have Q&As. I'll hand it over to you, Sabin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eduardo. And I think this is a really good way of introducing readiness. And just to kind of, for the audience's point of view, one of the reasons why we're only presenting readiness here in this webinar is, I think, because we really want to build this enabling environment to really kind of, help the countries take advantage of developing a plan, developing different types of interventions in the countries to really get your hands dirty, if I may, into the whole cooling space, and the readiness would be the first way of really kind of making use of that. And then, as Eduardo mentioned, with the new Readiness 2.0, where we have three years of financing, that makes it much more easier for for countries to really kind of get access to this as well. So having said this, and we are 25 minutes over the allocated budget for the timing, but we do have a lot of questions popping up. So I will try to read out as many as I can, and then I'll ask some of the panelists. And please, dear panelists, if you guys could be very brief so that we could get through as many questions as possible. The first question is from Rafaela Belanca. What is in-kind technologies? Nihar, do you want to just kind of give a small synopsis of your answer?
Yeah, thank you, Sabine, for the question. So essentially, in-kind refers to, essentially, the Montreal Protocol has these HFC refrigerants. So essentially, in-kind alternatives would be, other HFC refrigerants or fluorinated or brominated molecules, refrigerant molecules that are in-kind alternatives, and not in-kind refers to alternatives that are non-fluorinated and non-brominated. So I actually typed the answer into the box right underneath it. So hopefully that provides enough background. And please get in touch if you need any further information. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nihar. Second question is from Rudy Piran. Please give a brief on financial models, cool lease, on-bill utility, others, if any. Would any panelists like to take this on, or I could also give a crack at it if no one else wants to do that?
Response.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I think it's in response, or the questions in relation to the Rwanda project that we have. As I showed briefly on the slides, we had two types of mechanisms in Rwanda in development. One is on a cool lease, so development of a leasing model. It's focused on the commercial refrigeration and public sector. And then the other part of it was focused more on the residential side and using utility, the utility there to pay back the purchase of the product over a period of time. And that, of course, helps with reducing the financial barrier that the consumer would have as far as replacing an old product with a new product, spreading it over time. It's a model that's been used in other countries as well. Like, for example, in India on the lighting and now cooling side as well. That's it from my side. Thanks.
All right, perfect. And then thank you so much, Patrick. And just Rutri, just to kind of give you an idea, on the GCF side, that's one of the key things that we're trying to do through both the readiness as well as our funding proposal, is to come up with new business models and new ideas that could work to actually alleviate the gaps in financing. I mean, I think both Mel as well as Patrick talked about, there is going to be there are perceived gaps in terms of, efficient air conditioners versus non. And then so just to kind of alleviate those gaps and the risk aversion, those are things that GCF is really looking forward to financing and to getting rid of as well, to mitigate, I would say get rid of, to mitigate. So if you have any questions, please do give us a buzz, we will be more than happy to kind of work with you on this. And then the second, the question is from Mark Rodka. The speakers have presented a pretty convincing evidence about the importance of MEPS and CAPS and supporting policies that drive cooling technology choice. How does these fit with GCF's programs and approaches? Eduardo, do you want to take this or should I?
Fabian, well, why don't, if you inviting me, I can take a first stab, and I am sure you will comment. Yes, this well, this fits with very well with the GCF mandate, which is to support countries to develop their to increase and deliver on their increased ambition. Sorry, I should have said that, increased ambition and develop strategies and implement on their climate change. Reach their climate change strategies by this is the way I like to put it, right? By thinking carefully about how to make investments that will catalyze more investments, crowd in private sector investments, de-risk investments that are seen potentially as well, risky or difficult to make. But the GCF is there to, in a sense, to demonstrate what's possible to be done. And attract more investors once we show the way. There was just a couple of years ago, this financial institution I will not name, but one of their chairman told me, the GCF, you should lead the way on energy, and we will follow. We want to see what are the right types of investments to make, so that we can decarbonize and have a low emission future. So I see this as falling squarely into, or very much aligned with the discussion that we're having. So it fits the mandate of GCF beautifully. But I think my colleague Sabin will perhaps be more specific than I on that. I'm perhaps talking much more in what the mandate says, but Sabin is the person to go to, right, Sabin, in terms of what are the ideas we've been working on. Anyway, I'll hand it over to you, Sabin.
Thanks, everyone. I don't think I need to add more to this, but I mean, Mark, we can touch base on this bilaterally. But exactly like Eduardo said, I think this fits in perfectly. I think the whole MEPS and the policies, as Jerry also mentioned, this is on the two-prong approach that we have, is enabling environment and then investments that follow to actually match the enabling environment. So I think this is a really good way to go about it. Thank you so much, Eduardo. And we have a question from Jose Banga to Melanie. Thank you, Melanie, for your presentation. What are the main barriers to investment in cooling sector today?
Thanks. I think colleagues might have answers to this as well, but I think that a lot of it's about a lack of interest in efficiency for a start, and there's a lack of knowledge in some circles, but there's also you know, a lack of interest. People want to invest in, you know, particularly domestically, things quickly, and the savings to an individual household, particularly in the wealthy parts of the world where there's lots of air conditioners, the savings to the individual household are relatively small. And you know, some people just have brand loyalty. They've always bought the same type of thing. They just don't look. So well, that's one of the reasons that the minimum energy performance standard is such an important tool, because we need for the least efficient products just not to be available for choice, basically. I think, yeah, that's my main, that's the main point, I think. Information. Yeah.
No, thank you, Mel. I think that makes sense. And I think that's the kind of where we're kind of headed towards as well, to really kind of stop the inefficient ones as much as possible. We can kind of get that done. I think we can basically move up the tier a little bit as well. So thank you. There's another question from Umang Agarwal. This is to Lily. You have mentioned solar power ACs, which is interesting. However, we have found repeatedly that the size and the cost of solar PV to power AC rendered it economically unviable. Are there specific AC manufacturers models powered by solar PV? which will be also useful for humanitarian field settings.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, there's several manufacturers offering affordable solar cooling solutions, and many of them are Chinese. And then there's several types of AC using power. Like there's several types of solar AC, and using power from PV to drive AC is just one type of it. So GREE, for example, just to give an example, is manufactured solar-driven chiller, which covers 3,000 kilowatts, and it gives you cooling for service departments and hot water. The investment is 1.5 times higher typically, but operation costs are 30 to 50% less. So it, of course, depends on the business model. And there's also like Médecins Sans Frontières, like Doctors Without Borders. They're also they implemented in 2018, I think in Haiti, a hybrid type of solar AC, which uses power, they can run on power from PV directly. And they can also have alternating current from the grid or the generator. And they're in the daytime, they use the panels directly. And if you need it for the evening, then they can run on the power from the grid. So it's a different kind of hybrid model. And there's also Solar Chill, for example, project, which was deployed for cold storage using solar. So those are just some examples, but there's certainly a lot of leading manufacturers deploying these technologies that are affordable from China. And of course, more depends on the business models that you use for these applications and the local businesses. Happy to discuss further.
Perfect. Thank you, Lily. And Umang, if you would like to know more, I mean, I think we will be sharing the slides with you, and you will have Lily's contacts as well. So you can get in touch with her bilaterally as well to get the more specifics on these technologies that she just mentioned. So everybody, I mean, we are 10 minutes over the limit. If you don't mind, maybe 5 more minutes question and answers. I mean, I think we have pretty good questions here, and then I mean, it would basically do me injustice to not ask this, and then not have you guys answer them. So a question from what's the next? From Victor. Question to UNEP: is it possible to integrate refrigerant transition in the MEPS and labeling policy? So maybe, I mean, maybe Patrick, and I think maybe Amarine and Nihar could also jump in on this as well.
Thanks, Saban. Yeah, briefly from my side, and then it'd be good to hear from Nihar and Amberine as well. On the model regulations that we've developed and are working with countries to implement, that includes both the refrigerant side and the efficiency. So it includes that already within there. So that's one of the key aspects. That's where we're working with countries on, not to do that separately, but to bring it together under one regulation. But I'm sure Nihar and Amberine can add to that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding also is that there are a few countries that have tried to do this. There are labels, and labeling schemes where they're trying to combine both the efficiency and the, I think in China, I don't know how successful they've been, how big the uptake has been, but I think it is certainly possible in principle. And we'd certainly like to see a lot more of it, as Patrick said, happening in the future, including with the U4E regulations.
Right, it's definitely possible. I would say that we have a whole separate presentation on the barriers and challenges to getting the folks who are working on MEPS and labeling to integrate that particular concept. So that's sort of a separate discussion that we could go into a lot more detail about. But there's some of the same challenges that we're facing here with getting folks to think about energy efficiency and refrigerant transition together. So it's really just one big conversation. So it's slowly but surely moving in the right direction.
Thank you, guys. It's a slow process, but I think we're heading in the right direction on vision transition and labeling. A question from Kishna Lokan. We see a lot of fiscal measures to improve liquidity on the supply side. How do we direct these to investment into energy efficiency? Anyone in the panel? Kishna, let me try to take this one on. I think the clear thing that we see from a GCF angle side of things, as well as on energy efficiency as a whole on the investment side, is we're trying to basically, like I said, trying to develop the enabling environment which creates an envelope for or an atmosphere for private sector to come in so that they can actually put in more investment into energy efficiency. And then what MEPS, NCAPs, and all of the work that we just talked about today is really going to lay the basis for developing a financial mechanism, a funding mechanism for different types of investments to come in. And that's what we're trying to achieve through the cooling initiative and the GCF, as well as with other partners that we're working with, be it the MDBs, also with our direct access entities. I mean, we have a couple of programs in the pipelines that are really looking at different sorts of financing of cooling, be it through an ESCO model, be it through credit lines, through banks, to really kind of make this happen. So this is a work in progress, and I think there are innovative ideas out there. And then I think this is one of the things that we, and I always like to stress, is that risk, the riskier financing. So if you have a project that you feel that commercial banks or commercial entities will not take on, please bring it to the GCF. I think there may be a way where we can, work with you to find the right people to get these kind of investments done. I hope I was able to answer that. If not, please do shoot me an email or just send me a chat. We can have a bilateral discussion on this as well. Based on this, I have a comment from Esther Monray, who says that the UNIDO will be releasing guidelines on energy efficiency for domestic and commercial refrigeration for Guatemala, Ecuador, Uganda, Lebanon, and Morocco, which is an MLF conversion project with refrigerants, which is being financed by Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, KCEP. KCEP, is one of the stakeholders and partners for us as well. And the assessments will be offered for the methodology and tools. And so I think thank you for that update, Esther. And this would be something to be look forward to all the participants. If you could share that with other people as well, or share it with us, and we can share it to the wider group as well. We thank you for that. And then we have a question from Victor. Question to GCF and UNEP: how do you see the best approach to integrate policy work and accredited entities, especially direct access, to reach funding proposals for cooling technologies? Patrick, Eduardo?
Sabin, can I come first?
Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Patrick. Yes. That's an interesting question to me. I think we could take it offline. But as a quick reaction, we do very much like to think about how to bring in the capacities and the interests of our direct access entities into this type of discussion. Of course, when you're talking about enabling environments, there's so much that needs to be done at the government level that it's not necessarily about the direct access entity. But there's so many scenarios, but I'd like to think, for instance, that while we work with the government and an NDA on the regulatory environment, we're working, for instance, through a commercial bank to increase or to think about how will we invest together with that commercial bank, and once the regulatory environment is there in place. But there are so many steps, and I'm sure colleagues here are much more savvy than I are on this. But yeah, just a quick reaction. We'd love to have specifically this type of conversation, and as I've been referred to, link you with the with the partners so that we can think about this together, use the benchmarks that are available, the good practices, the examples of other countries where this has worked. As a matter of fact, that example of those examples that I showed you are of a country that had included in the readiness proposal as well to check experience from other countries about the financial mechanisms that they implemented. So there's just so much that from the readiness perspective as well that we could think about doing. It's very difficult for me to give you one single answer. That conversation would be a very nice one to have. Patrick, Sabin, back to you.
Thanks, Eduardo. Yeah, from my side, I think you covered a lot of it. And on the readiness side, that is one aspect, working with the direct access entities as well, to bring them in as part of those projects. So it's not to work on their capacities and to bring in for example, development of a financial mechanism, that it's really focusing on that. And of course, the direct access entity is important within that. But yeah, something that we could certainly expand on further. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and thank you all our participants. I am so sorry. I mean, I think we are already 18 minutes above the time, but I promise you, we have these questions on file, and I will get to these questions and make sure that if I can't answer them, we'll have one of our panel members answer them and get back to you. It's a solemn promise from my side, so that we can keep this going. But it is so great from an energy efficiency, from a cooling point of view, from a GCF point of view. I think this is the participants and the questions. It's great to see the interaction here in this this webinar. So I really do appreciate it, and I think all of the panelists as well as both UNEP and as well as GCF, we appreciate this as well. And I think the one of the main intentions of this work, this webinar, was one, to impart knowledge in terms of what's happening in the cooling space. But actually, the main thing for us really is to kind of call to action. I think this is where I hope that you guys are convinced enough. Everybody's convinced enough that there is something that can be done either in your country or in your sector or in your ministry or with your agencies on cooling. And I hope we can be part of that as a collective to make things happen. So please do let us know, any of us in this workshop, as well as some of our key stakeholder partners that couldn't be here with us, like KCEP, Kigali Cooling, SE for All, UNIDO, who have been in part of this discussion with us in getting this webinar up and running. Let any of us know what can be done, how we can do things, and please let's get some actions on the ground. I think cooling is such an important piece of the equation, in the climate equation, and and I think from a practitioner's point of view, this is where we can really see some impact. I think we will, if we can basically dedicate the next 3 to 4 years on really getting efficient cooling in place, both through use as well as from the refrigerant transition, we will have made a dent in this sector. And that's a huge thing to say, coming from there's so much going on in the climate space. So I would really urge you all to keep raising these questions, raising ideas. And as we say in energy efficiency, there is no bad idea. There's only good ideas, and there are better ideas. So please bring those to us and to everybody, and share it with everybody as well. So with this, I would like to close this webinar. But in closing, I would like to especially thank Sophie and Irene from the UNEP side, who have been instrumental in getting this webinar in place. Thank you so much, Sophie and Irene. And I also like to thank the two great people on the GCF side, Yoon Young and Adrian, who've been instrumental in really organizing everything as well. I know no one can hear me, but a big clap to all of you guys for doing this. And then to you, the participants, thank you so much. I mean, this has been overwhelming. I mean, we saw the number of participants and the registrations, and it just blew our mind at how important this is. And we know it was important, but it's great to see that you guys feel it the same way. And like I said, We will be sharing this recording. We've recorded this. We will be sharing this with you. We will also be sending to you a questionnaire as well. And then please, to everybody that's registered, and on this one, please let us know what you like, what you didn't like, what you need more. And I think this is, like I said, this is the beginning, not the end. So we would like to be doing more of these kind of webinars with you, what kind of topics you would like. If you need more financing, do you need more on NCAPs? Do you need more on modalities? Please let us know, because I think the whole idea, again, from, like I said before, is to make sure that we are all joined together to make this world cool. And cool in the proper way, cool without too much air conditioners, that are inefficient air conditioners. As Mel, so I would like to end this on Mel's word. Let's get rid of the inefficient conditioners and let's go with the more efficient cooling devices to make the world cool. With this, I would like to thank all of the panelists. You guys have been superb, as always. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Jerry, for the opening remarks and being in the panel for the whole 2 hours. I know you are really busy with the board meeting coming up. And thank you, everybody, again. Our email addresses are here, just in case, but we will be sharing this with you. Once again, thank you so much, and we will be in touch. And then please do get in touch with us if you have any questions, or if we didn't answer any of your questions, or if you think of new questions. All right. Thank you very much, and a very good day, good evening, and to Nihar, good morning as well. I think it's already morning for him. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sabine.
Thank you, Sabine.
Thanks,
Thank you to
Sabine.
everybody, Sophie and
Everyone. Bye.
Irene as well. Thank you.
Thank you.